Hey guys, so this is a video that I've been wanting to make for a very long time, ever since I saw this video, which may have been over a year ago, for a video called What If Africa Was Never Colonized? Ever since I saw this video, maybe over a year ago, I've been wanting to make a response video. So here's my response. What I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to kind of do a reaction video where I'm going to be playing the video, watching the video, and responding to the video. Just a disclaimer right up front: I don't like this video. I think it's super biased and racist and full of white supremacist remarks. I think that the remarks are subtle and full of propaganda. I think it's the reason. I think it is the problem with white America. I think it's the problem with the way a lot of the I think it's the problem with Eurocentric thinking. And I think that without further investigation, one can see this video and think that this is actually truth and fact, when in fact it is really just an expression of an opinion. Predominantly, a lot of it is fact mixed in with a lot of opinion, and it's not really, a lot of it is not really based in reality. And a lot of people will swallow it and think that this is actually this is actually fact and doctrine, and it's actually like some kind of scientific evidence, that there's a lot of it is evidence based, but a lot of it is just theoretical, opinion based, and just complete lies. So I want to just go through it and give a rebuttal to all of this, give a response to all of this, and kind of show you and break down the lies that are told in this video that was made by AlternateHistoryHub. I don't think that anyone has made an effective response to this video yet so far on YouTube, and so I wanted to take the time to do that today. So enjoy. Let's begin.
Africa has had a complex and turbulent history for the past couple of centuries, from the invasions by the Arabs to the eventual colonization of 90% of the land by Europeans. Africa has been left in a sorry state. With the news of the wars, genocides, and political turmoil inside the new nations of the continent, many point blame to the European powers who carved up Africa into their own colonies. This makes me wonder, what if the scramble for Africa never
so let's
happened?
just stop right there, because right there is the beginning of the painting of the picture of his kind of Eurocentric view on everything. He sets up the picture by saying, basically, a lot of bad stuff keeps happening to Africa, blah, 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 and everyone's blaming the Europeans. Specifically, the Berlin Conference, which led to aka the scramble for Africa, where Europeans pretty much carved up Africa, and everyone's blaming us that all this bad stuff keeps happening to Africa. And I just want to just stop right there, because if you're not careful and if you allow yourself to get absorbed into his narrative, you are going to fall under the impression that this is a fact. And I want to distinguish between fact and opinion, because one thing that this gentleman does in this video is he continually and consistently keeps stating keeps stating his opinions as though they're fact. He kind of blurs the lines between fact and opinion in this video, and I want to take careful time to make sure that I demarcate the lines between fact and opinion, so that you do not get absorbed in this narrative and become brainwashed by the things that he's saying here. So let's go ahead and continue to listen to this video. Oh, and the points in this that are actually opinion as opposed to fact is how he's just saying that blah, 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 bad stuff keeps happening to Africa, and everyone's blaming the Europeans for everything that's wrong in Africa. And that's a very broad sweeping statement. In psychology, people call that that's a very broad sweeping statement, and pretty much he's generalizing, and kind of, I guess in psychology they call it catastrophizing. He's generalizing everything, kind of saying that everybody is blaming the Europeans. All this all like a lot of terrible things are happening in Africa. Like he's kind of making it seem like making sweeping statements. Africa is in a I think the first statement he said was Africa is in a sorry state. So he's basically saying there's no good things that's happening in Africa, which is what it sounds like to me. So the first picture you paint is Africa bad. And everyone's blaming the Europeans. And that is a very general statement that needs to be inspected. So if that's the impression, if that's the first thing that comes into your mind as you're listening to this video, you're already at a disadvantage in listening to this video critically. So let's continue.
What was this? The scramble for Africa was the rapid colonization and split of African land by the European powers. What if this rush of colonization never happened? What would the continent be like? Well, before we can talk about this, we need to learn some brief history. What caused the scramble for Africa? For much of the 19th century, European powers were rapidly expanding across the globe. However, before 1870, Africa had remained mostly uncolonized by Europe, except for the French in Algeria, scattered Portuguese trading cities, and the British and Dutch in the south. This changed with King Leopold, I disgrace the name of Waffles II, who annexed the Congo as his own personal property. Not even Belgian property, his personal land. By doing so, Leopold freaked out the rest of Europe's empires, who began grabbing land to gain resources and outcompete rivals. To avoid conflict over the land, Germany invited the global powers to Berlin to discuss the future of Africa. The empires agreed on how to split the land, taking 90% of it. Very much oversimplified, after decades of European colonialism and 2 world wars, nationalist movements rose up and Africans slowly gained independence. However, the borders they were left with were clunky and odd since they were drawn without concern for native
I'm gonna
demographics.
stop right there because even though he did acknowledge that it was oversimplified, one way in which he oversimplified it, because that's kind of like when they have one of those medication commercials, especially back in the day. Nowadays, they actually do say, well, this medication could cause anal leakage and death. But back in the day, they would just have the fine print at the bottom of the television screen, and you wouldn't even know that the medication that they're advertising to you is going to kill you. But by him saying that there, this is very much oversimplified, he is one of the ways in which he oversimplified it is by neglecting to mention that Europeans facilitated every step of the way after the even after the Africans gained their independence. So none of it was done independently. So even though whatever he considers Africa to be today, it was 100% of it was facilitated by European intervention. So even whatever he's saying, what if Africa was never colonized, you cannot look at the current state of Africa today in isolation of the European influence. So it's very difficult for me to say that difficult for me to say that out of context. But what I'm trying to say is that what he said specifically that makes me to say this is that he said that national movements rose up and Africans slowly gained their independence. So when he's saying that Africans slowly gained their independence, it's as if he's trying to say that somehow Africans were no longer under the rule of Europeans. And then he says nationalist movements rose up, which implies that all of a sudden Africans decided that they wanted to keep these borders that were drawn by the Europeans, and they wanted to claim themselves as these specific nations that the Europeans were the ones who demarcated for them, and that those were all just magically happened, that all these billions of African people decided that they were going to keep things the same, and as if there was no European intervention that inspired that. And I just want to make sure that we define our terms here, and not just brush over that fact as we go along. And the reason why this is important is because I want us to understand. I want us to be aware of the rationality behind the thinking of this guy. A lot of people who consider Africa and African people forget to rationalize about critically thinking about the way African people think and the way we reason within the context of ourselves as individuals and what our desires are. We're considered as a collective instead of individual people, and or entire countries and things like that. And when decisions are made, it's decided for everybody. So even the question, what if Africa was never colonized, considers the entire continent of Africa and does not consider any one particular people group in Africa. So it's an unfair question, period. So for him to come, so I just wanted to make sure that we understood the unfairness of him brushing over that piece and just kind of mentioning that nationalist movements rose up and Africans slowly gained their independence, and then goes into the point of borders being clunky and odd because they were imposed, and just saying that, okay, that's a problem, but let's not talk about that too much. But let's just say that that's part of the reason why Africa, I just want you to make sure you're aware that there is an inherent problem in the reasoning and the rationale of that statement. And I'm not sure that I was clear. I'm not sure that I made my point there clearly, but hopefully as this video progresses, I'll have another opportunity to double down on that point in a way that more clearly states what I'm trying to state there.
People who were alike were split up, and people who were too different were lumped in the same nation, like if Britain and France were combined as the same country. Fighting started, governments fell. Much of Africa didn't have the education, infrastructure, or national identity fit for European-style nations, and fell into chaos. So what if the scramble for Africa never occurred?
I just want to harp on that point where he said that much of Africa didn't have the education, infrastructure, or national identity fit for European-style nations. First of all, I think that definitely reveals his Eurocentric bias for us clearly, because what he's saying there is that the European-style nation is the standard that he's going up against. And so his question is very based on whether or not will Africa have ever reached European style civility. I don't know what European style nation means to him. Maybe it means civility, which is what most people think when they think of European style nations, as opposed to Africanism or African style nations, which that's a big question mark whether that's actually a real definition or not. But when he says that Africa, okay, so here's the definition he gives: education, infrastructure, and national identity. So those are the three elements that comprise a European style nation that he says that Africa was lacking. And so let's delve deeper into that. Let's delve just a little bit deeper into that real quick. So first of all, European nations is a standard, and he's saying that Africa didn't have the education, infrastructure, and national identity. First of all, education. Why didn't Africa have the education? Maybe because their people were forced to work, many of them were forced into forced labor for the European industrial complex, so that they could continue to build Europe instead of educating the people so that they could actually be independent. That colonialism, they're saying colonialism as if colonialism was just an abstract thing or an abstract idea, but what it actually was invasion and slavery. So it was like somebody coming into your home and telling you, you're going to work for me, and everything that you own is going to be everything you own and everything that you create is going to be used to facilitate my home, which is elsewhere. So that is what colonialism is. So let's not so educating the people who are within that land or keeping them together as a family unit is not advantageous to the colonizers. So if there was no education after colonialism, that's why. That's not to say that there was no education before colonialism. That's just to say that during colonialism, education was not encouraged for the native people in that community. Now, to say that there was no infrastructure, the infrastructure that was built for and maintained on a higher level by the colonial rulers. So, okay, infrastructure. There was infrastructure in Nigeria brought by I know as someone who's Nigerian that there was infrastructure in Nigeria brought by colonial higher colonial leaders, but it was not maintained because a lot of people were a lot of the people who were maintaining them either left or were killed after the British flight and independence of Nigeria. So that's one of the things. And then national identity. Well, I think that goes without saying. That's one of the places where he actually got it right in this country, in this video. So I'm not going to say much more on that. But to say that it was not fit for European style nations, I will say that that's actually a lie, because a lot of European nations are actually made up of smaller ethnic groups. Africa, this problem is not unique to Africa. There's a lot of European nations that are made up of smaller ethnic groups. As I recently discovered, Spain is one of them. So I'm sure there's many more, but I won't go into any more detail on that. But I know that at that time, there definitely were other European nations, like Russia, a lot of places in the Soviet Union. But if you're talking about just Western Europe, I think it's Western Europe. Then yeah, I guess Germany and France and Spain, and there's other places like that that have smaller ethnic groups that aren't as prevalent, but still that still have the same but still have a quote unquote national identity that can an infrastructure and and stuff like that could be considered. But this guy has an agenda in this video, and I just want to make sure we are all aware of that. So let's continue.
No matter how unlikely that would be, Europe certainly would have conquered Africa no matter what. But for some reason, let's say they never carve up the continent like they did in our timeline. That's what I'm going to explore. In this alternate timeline, Europeans still hold territory in Africa, but not much, only 10%, mostly around the coast. Europeans in this alternate timeline simply just don't invade the center of Africa and divide it amongst themselves. They continue the mutual trade with African kingdoms and tribes that occurred in our timeline. Like ivory, gold, and other goods.
I'm sorry, I was going to let it go. I was going to move on from this, but I'm actually going to go back and play this part again because I really want to address it. I was just going to let it go and then like leave a sub caption, but I'm going to actually play it again so that you can actually hear what he said and I can actually address it immediately.
That would be, Europe certainly would have conquered Africa no matter what.
He said no matter how unlikely that would be, because Europe certainly would have conquered Africa no matter what. And so I think I know why he's saying that. But let me just say right now that this is my opinion. It's not a fact. Unlike him, I'm actually going to say that this is my opinion. I believe that he's saying that because he inherently, like a lot of white people, believe that conquering is a natural human instinct, because their ancestors were conquerors and they just went around conquering people all the time, especially after they discovered guns and they just went around deciding to just kill people and take their land. So they just figured, well, this is a natural human instinct, we're just going to go around conquering people, and they never really thought twice about it. So now until today, they just kind of take it that was conquered or be conquered. And so they continue that cycle even till today, in more subtle ways. So, as far as this video is concerned, and as far as him saying that Europe definitely would have conquered Africa no matter what, I think he's saying a lot of things there. I think one of the things he's saying is that Africa can't defend itself, and since we conquer each other, at some point when Europe gets into it, they're going to eventually conquer Africa. And I just want to say one thing in defense of Africa in this situation. If that's the case, I mean, let's pretend that everybody is just conquering machines, and for example, there is just this innate thing about people that just go around conquering each other. For him to say Europe definitely would have conquered Africa no matter what, and he's supposed to be an alternate history hub that's supposed to be educating people on alternate history, he just doesn't sound very professional in what he claims that he's able to do here. Because to be an alternate history hub, you would have to be able to let your mind wander into different parallel realities. And right now, he doesn't seem to be very creative in the way he's thinking. He just seems to be one-track minded in the way he's thinking. And you're going to see that over and over in this video. He's very one-track minded when it comes to the idea, story of Europe's relationship to Africa. Very one-track minded. So, for example, why did he have to say Europe would have conquered Africa no matter what? Maybe Asia would have conquered Africa. I mean, that's one alternate history that he didn't even think twice to mention when he made that statement. Or maybe, somebody could have come to Africa's defense. Maybe Europe would have made a treaty with each other to say, let's just stop conquering people. There's a lot of alternatives to this. So why would he just make that blanket statement that no matter how that this is an unlikely thing that Europe would have conquered Africa no matter what. So it just is another point at which he reveals his underlying Eurocentric and anti African bias that I wanted to point out. And so I'm going to continue and let you guys finish hearing his viewpoints. But I was actually going to let that go and just kind of, maybe leave a comment, leave a caption there so that you just to kind of say, look at this. But I was like, nah, let me elaborate for you guys, because you might miss it if you're not careful. So.
But for some reason, let's say they never carve up the continent like they did in our timeline. That's what I'm going to explore. In this alternate timeline, Europeans still hold territory in Africa, but not much, only 10%, mostly around the coast. Europeans in this alternate timeline simply just don't invade the center of Africa and divide it amongst themselves. They continue the mutual trade with African kingdoms and tribes that occurred in our timeline, trading with Africans who brought resources from the center of the continent like ivory, gold, and other goods to the coastal trading ports which Europe held. Now, it's very unlikely this situation would last as Europe's imperial ambitions grew and technology improved. Direct rule became preferable over trading relations. However, for the sake of the scenario, let's say the balance stays. Now, a real question that needs to be asked is, what would life be like in sub-Saharan Africa in this alternate timeline? Would it be a utopian paradise free from the violence stirred by Europe, or would it be a backwards, uncivilized place never improving?
Let's stop right there for you. Let's stop right here for you. Let me just point that out as another evidence of his pro-Eurocentric and anti-African bias. He basically says here, or will it be a backwards, uncivilized place never improving? And he shows a group of Africans sitting in a circle having a forum. Yeah, backwards, uncivilized, and never improving is how he describes this group of gentlemen sitting here. Backwards and uncivilized. So think about that.
Uncivilized place never improving. The answer is not so black and white, pun intended. If you went into this video asking, would Africa be like Europe and Asia, the answer is no. Even with enough trade and exchange of ideas, most sub-Saharan African people were not technologically advanced enough to compete with Europe and East Asia. In this alternate timeline, if Europeans invested more in trade with native Africans instead of conquering them, they could indirectly cause the spread of new African empires. Why? Because it already happened in our timeline with another tribal people. In colonial North America, the native tribes and European colonists had a beneficial relationship based on the trade of furs. The natives would trap animals and sell the furs to the colonial powers. The Europeans would give numerous goods, such as weapons, in return. Some tribes began to run out of fur to trade. The only way to get more fur was more land. This spawned a brutal and horrific war. The British and Dutch allied and armed the Iroquois Confederacy against the French and their allied tribes. The Iroquois rapidly expanded, seizing territory from neighboring tribes, and even depopulating entire regions of local tribes. In this alternate timeline, the same thing would apply.
Okay, so let me just address this right now. So basically what he's saying is that if they continue trade that way and gave Africans weapons, then we would indirectly caused the spread of new African empires, which to that I say, and what is wrong with that? Um, he gave the example of a negative response to creating an Indians kind of creating their own sort of depopulating places. He called it depopulating, whereas when Napoleon conquers people, or Attila the Hun, or whoever else they idolize in history, in white people history, when they conquer their own people or other people, they see it as conquering, or that. But then their fear is that if they give weapons, or if they allow Africans or Native Americans, as he mentioned with the Iroquois, that they will be depopulating. So that just sounds to me, or that the only time empire building, because he's saying that the problem is the indirect spread of African empires. The only time empire building is a good thing is when it's a white empire, like Roman Empire or something like that. I just don't. It just smells like white, Eurocentric propaganda again. Like it's just thick in this video. So I just wanted to point that out. All roads lead to racism, and I just don't want people to be deceived by what's going on in this video. Just don't take it for at face value and say that what he's saying is correct, because right now what he's saying is that if Africa was never colonized, and they exchanged goods and weapons, and if they just exchanged like normal human beings, instead of doing what they did, which is colonizing and enslaving and all that stuff to African people, that it would have been a huge problem, because then African people would have gone crazy and snapped and would have started killing everybody. And it's like, it's specifically their own people. This is what he's saying, is that we would have started killing our own people, and that would have been a terrible thing. So he's trying to make us afraid of ourselves, that we should not want our own liberation, because we are a danger to ourselves, because we are helmet children who need to walk around with helmets and ride special buses. So whatever, Mr. Imperialist.
If Europeans were going to trade with sub-Saharan Africans instead of conquering them, native kingdoms would need to expand to keep up with demand. Europeans give weapons to their preferred kings and tribes, like how they did in the Americas. French, British, and Germans indirectly influencing leaders through trade and supplying them weapons. This has positives and negatives. The positives is that large civilizations would have spread rapidly across Africa. Throughout human history, civilizations have been formed through war and conquest. The same thing would happen in Africa, just at a faster rate. New kingdoms would try to claim land in the center. The land and culture would be divided and influenced by Africans, instead of being conquered, like in our timeline, by Europeans. The negatives is the mass violence itself. Europe would give modern weapons to native kings. We saw this terrible violence happen with Africans capturing Africans for the slave trade, and in the Americas with the natives. It would happen at a much larger scale in Africa with modern equipment supplied. Now, about Africa on the global
violence,
scale.
I'm so confused by what he's saying right now. Like, he's predicting that Africans would just just kill them all. Like, we just kill everybody in Africa. We would just kill all of ourselves. We would just be like a baby with an atomic bomb. We just press the nuke button and just kill all our whole selves. We just be like I don't understand what he's saying here. Like, we just can't be trusted with ourselves. Like, I can understand the part where he said about empire building, but he's saying mass violence. Like, I don't understand what he's saying. Like, why would it happen at a faster rate in Africa than it does in other places? He doesn't really make a logical argument there, so I can't really even make an argument against it or make a case against it, because he doesn't make an argument, because he just states it like it's fact, like it would just happen, like we would just. I'm so confused. And then on top of that, how many times have there been a faster scale or like mass violence done in the Holocaust, Hiroshima and Nagasaki? I mean, like, the list goes on and on, but I don't want to talk about that because we're talking about what if Africa was never colonized. So let's continue.
Even if kingdoms did conquer throughout the continent, sub-Saharan Africa would certainly remain very tribal, with very little political entities in the center of the continent, an oddity in a world made up of nation-states. In this alternate timeline, Ethiopia would remain a prominent empire while various Somali city-states would trade with the Arabs and Europeans. In South Africa, the British and Dutch already control much of the region, and so I imagine an apartheid-like system would still occur. The history of the entire globe would be changed since the scramble for Africa formed new imperialism in Europe, diverting resources for colonies in Asia to Africa. This imperialism was one of the driving factors for World War I, so without the scramble for Africa, it affects the history of the entire 20th century. In this alternate timeline, Africa's relationship to the world would be complex and odd. Let me just say this real quick. Spurred by Europe.
Okay, I want to go back a little bit, because he says something around here where he says, his opinion basically stated as fact is that sub-Saharan Africa would certainly remain very tribal and with very little political entities in the center of the continent. I'm not sure where he got that from. Hold on, where is it? Hold on, let's just play that again.
Itself. Europe would give modern weapons to native kings. We saw this terrible violence happen with Africans capturing Africans for the slave trade, and in the Americas with the natives. It would happen at a much larger scale in Africa.
By the way, I'm very tired of white people saying that Africans captured Africans for the slave trade. I'm very tired of that argument, but that's another video.
Now, about Africa on the global scale. Even if kingdoms did conquer throughout the continent, sub-Saharan Africa would certainly remain very tribal, with very little political entities in the center of the continent, an oddity in a world made up of nation-states. In this alternate timeline, Ethiopia would remain a prominent empire while various Somali city-states would trade with the Arabs and Europeans. In South Africa, the British and Dutch already control much of the region, and so I imagine an apartheid-like system would still occur. The history of the entire globe would be changed since the scramble for Africa formed new imperialism in Europe, diverting resources for colonies in Asia to Africa. This imperialism was one of the driving factors for World War I, so without the scramble for Africa, it affects the history of the entire 20th century. In this alternate timeline, Africa's relationship to the world would be complex and odd. Spurred by Europe's trade, kingdoms would be across the coast waging war against one another. In Central Africa, there would hardly be any political entity. Order would be maintained by the various villages who would remain undeveloped. In this alternate timeline, sub-Saharan Africa would have works of art and culture, but technologically and economically would always be behind, subject to outside powers, be it European or Arabs. However, even if the continent would be influenced, the African states would be developed by Africans, not drawn by Europe. The past century of horrendous violence, genocide, state-sponsored atrocities, and famines would not occur. But this doesn't mean things would be happy sunshine. Humans are naturally brutal, and tribal life is still extremely hard. Violence, ethnic and religious hatred would still occur. Much of the continent would be undeveloped.
Hold on.
Life expectancy
I was hoping that he would go deeper into this point right here, but it just didn't happen. It just did not happen. So let me just go back and allow you to be flabbergasted by this.
Form new imperialism in Europe, diverting resources for colonies in Asia to Africa. This imperialism was one of the driving factors for World War I, so without the scramble for Africa, it affects the history of the entire 20th century. So he's basically
saying, without the scramble for Africa, that Europeans would have never had World War II, and everybody would just drank tea. Europeans would have just been sitting around drinking tea. That Europeans were just like, it's Africa's fault that we were fighting too. Like, how everything is Africa's fault. Everything is black people's fault. How did you end up blaming World War II on black people also, on top of everything? Like, I'm not sure. Like, this is ridiculous. I'm so confused. All of a sudden he said that, well, let me just break it down, because right now it probably sounds like I'm being irrational, but he says basically that the scramble for Africa was a driving force to European imperialism, they rerouted a lot of resources that would have gone to Asian colonialism to Africa, and that result, like built up a lot of European imperialism, and that was one of the major causes of the world wars. So without the scramble for Africa, it would have changed the entire directory and trajectory of the whole 21st century, which is a true statement in and of itself. But he really just glossed over that whole thing, and I really want us to soak it in and soak in the magnitude of the Eurocentric anti-Africanness of this video. It is thick. Let's finish.
In this alternate timeline, Africa's relationship to the world would be complex and odd. Spurred by Europe's trade, kingdoms would be across the coast waging war against one another. In Central Africa, there would hardly be any political entity. Order would be maintained by the various villages who would remain undeveloped. In this alternate timeline, sub-Saharan Africa would have works of art and culture, but technologically and economically would always be behind, subject to outside powers, be it European or Arabs. However, even if the continent would be influenced, the African states would be developed by Africans, not drawn by Europe.
So
the past century of horrendous violence.
So basically, I don't understand whether he's saying that this thing is something that will happen forever, like Africa will be quote unquote undeveloped forever, or whether he's trying to say that Africa is undeveloped. It will be undeveloped at this time as a result of it. Just let me just say this. Okay, so if he's saying that the world wars would never have happened, which is basically what he's saying, is that all those guns, all those technologies and stuff like that that were built in order to foster those world wars would never have happened. That means that Europe would have itself never be as what it is today if the scramble for Africa never had happened, which means that there would have been most likely a much more level playing field if the scramble for Africa had never have happened. Let's be honest about all of this. Africans, black people, built Europe and built the Americas. So the scramble for Africa would have put us on if Africa was never colonized and slavery never happened, we would be on a much more level playing field. So everything he's saying right now is cock and bull. All of this happened within a system. It did not happen in isolation. It was not just Africa by itself, and then the West was over there building stuff and becoming all fancy. It actually happened within the context of an entire system. So, within which Africa was playing a major role. So let us not just make statements of opinion as though they're fact. And this is just ridiculous. Okay, let's just finish watching this thing. We're almost done.
Genocide, state-sponsored atrocities, and famines would not occur. But this doesn't mean things would be happy sunshine. Humans are naturally brutal, and tribal life is still extremely hard. Violence, ethnic and religious hatred would still occur. Much of the continent would be undeveloped. Life expectancy still is lower compared to the rest of the world. Diseases kill many, and infant mortality is still high. Relief efforts from more prosperous nations still occur in this alternate timeline. Whether Africa would have been better in this alternate timeline is up to your own. I was listening to that and thinking he was talking about current state of things, but he's saying in the alternate timeline, all those stuff would happen, like humans. What? And he's basically saying that Africa we're just naturally in need of European aid, is what he's saying. That disease would continue to happen, relief efforts, we would still need to be saved by the West, the Great White Hope would still be needed, and all that kind of stuff. Like, what? Are you serious? Opinion. Much of the violence would be downplayed, however the issues of low education, underdevelopment, and disease would still occur. This is just one scenario. We'll never 100% know how something would be, but it's nice to theorize. Like on Facebook and help support me on Patreon if you like this content. This is Cody from the Alternate History Hub.
Alright, so let me just say a few points to end this video. That was the most racist piece of crap I've ever seen. But I don't blame him. He is a product of his environment. He's a victim. He's a product. But unfortunately, so many people agree with him. As you can see, he has over 20,000 likes on this video, and only one, only let's say 1 out of 7 people disagree with him. So let's say 6 out of 7 people agree with this idiot. So I shouldn't call him an idiot because I actually don't hate people. I just think that this guy's very, very delusional and brainwashed about life. Unfortunately, that is the case with a lot of people in this world right now. A lot of people that's the propaganda that's being fed out into the media, into society. A lot of people who are blindly swallowing the racist propaganda that is being perpetuated today are actually think exactly like this man thinks. And that is exactly why one of the biggest reasons why the world is in the state that it is today, with all the problems that the world has today. So and all the conflict and all the violence and all the anger and all the hate and all the animosity and all the racist tension, this is the reason. This is one of the biggest reasons. So I just wanted to finally make this response video. And now that I've made this response video, please leave your comments. And if you agree with what I'm saying, and if any of this stuff is really sinking in and helping you to understand better, and you're able to better verbalize anything that I'm saying here, please go to Alternate History Hub. Please go to this video and please leave a comment, leave a thumbs down, and tell him why he's wrong. All right. I want to thank you for watching this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.